In 1603, Queen Elizabeth I passed away, and James I, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, ascended the throne, marking the beginning of the Stuart dynasty. In 1642, Charles I became the King of England. Over the issue of taxation, Charles I clashed with the English Parliament. He believed in the divine right of kings, asserting that the king's authority was granted by God and was superior to that of Parliament. However, the members of Parliament strongly disagreed. After prolonged disputes, Charles I decided to use force to resolve the conflict, leading to the outbreak of the English Civil War. At this time, England was divided into two factions, the Parliamentarians, led by Parliament, and the Royalists, led by the King. The confrontation between these two factions marked the start of the English Civil War. Under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, the Parliamentarians ultimately won the war. Charles I was executed, becoming the only English monarch to be beheaded. Following this, the monarchy in England was temporarily abolished. After the Civil War ended, Cromwell declared England a republic and assumed the title of Lord Protector, ushering in his era of military dictatorship. During Oliver Cromwell's rule over England, he was seen as a powerful and authoritative leader. He managed England with an iron fist, launched attacks on Scotland, and simultaneously suppressed Ireland and the Netherlands. Under his leadership, England entered a period of prosperity and development. However, the flaws of his dictatorship were equally evident, particularly his heavy-handed control over Parliament. This led to widespread dissatisfaction among the people, who even began to long for the return of the monarchy. In 1658, Cromwell passed away, leading to the collapse of the Protectorate. His dictatorship and the attempt to establish a republic were ultimately deemed failures. After Cromwell's death, his legacy ended in tragedy. By 1660, Charles II was restored to the throne by Parliament, reinstating the Stuart monarchy and re-establishing England's monarchy. Ironically, the very people who supported Charles II's restoration were the same ones who had opposed Charles I for Parliament. It didn't matter who sat on the throne, what mattered was whether the monarch upheld the Anglican Church and maintained a balance of power between the monarchy and Parliament. However, in reality, the power struggle between Parliament and the monarchy was never fully resolved. That said, during Charles II's reign, tensions were relatively mild. To appease public sentiment, Charles II initially chose to compromise. During his reign, Charles II strongly supported the advancement of science in England. He granted a royal charter to officially establish the Royal Society of London for improving natural knowledge, commonly known as the Royal Society. The society encouraged scientists to actively explore, invent, and create. It became home to many prominent figures such as Albert Einstein, Charles Darwin, Isaac Newton, and mathematician and physicist Stephen Hawking, among others. The establishment of the Royal Society marked England's emergence as the centre of modern natural science. In 1679, a fierce struggle erupted within the English Parliament over whether the throne of Charles II should be passed to his brother, James II. Since Charles II's children were all illegitimate and thus ineligible for succession, the only legitimate heir was his brother, James II. However, James II was a devout Catholic, which was in direct conflict with Parliament's requirement to maintain the Anglican Church as the national faith. As a result, Parliament was divided into two factions. One was the radical Whig Party, which supported religious reform and sought to exclude James II from the line of succession. The other was the conservative Tory Party, which upheld the legitimacy of royal succession and supported James II, including the king and Catholic clergy, to block James II from inheriting the throne. The Whig Party introduced the Exclusion Bill in 1679, aiming to remove James from the line of succession. However, Charles II rejected the bill and dissolved Parliament. The Whigs repeatedly introduced the Exclusion Bill, but it was never passed and instead led to harsh suppression by the king. Ultimately, James II ascended the throne. The struggle over the throne and the Exclusion Bill shaped the basic characteristics of the Whig and Tory parties, marking the emergence of party politics in England. In 1685, James II officially became the King of England. However, After ascending the throne, he strongly supported the development of Catholicism, appointed Catholics to key positions, and suppressed the growth of Protestantism. This sparked strong dissatisfaction among the predominantly Protestant population. Naturally, Parliament could not remain passive. After learning from past conflicts, Parliament decided to launch the Glorious Revolution, to avoid civil war and bloody conflict. Parliament secretly wrote Mary, the daughter of James II, and her husband, William of Orange, seeking their assistance. At the time, Mary and William were ruling the Netherlands and were both Protestants, sharing the same faith as Parliament. Moreover, William had royal blood ties to England. For Parliament, having William and Mary rule the country would benefit their cause. For the Netherlands, which was under threat from England and France, having William secure England's support would give them an advantage against France. Thus, William's plan to reconcile and oppose his father-in-law became feasible. In 1688, William led an army of tens of thousands to England. Initially, he was concerned about resistance from his father-in-law and the English people. But surprisingly, he was met with enthusiastic welcomes wherever he went. Adding to the drama, James II's military command was undermined by Churchill, an ancestor of Winston Churchill, the famous British Prime Minister during World War II. Realizing he had no support left, James II fled with his wife and daughter in disarray. With his retreat, William and Mary naturally became the new monarchs, bringing the Glorious Revolution to an end. Following this, Parliament passed the Bill of Rights, significantly limiting the power of the monarchy. In 1701, William III signed the Act of Settlement, which stipulated that the throne could not be passed to Catholics. After the Glorious Revolution, England established a constitutional monarchy, transferring power to Parliament. This marked the beginning of England's modernization and laid a solid foundation for the Industrial Revolution. After William and Mary came to power, they governed England effectively and brought stability to the country. Once domestic politics was stabilized, England shifted its focus overseas, aiming to expand trade and colonial territories. At the time, England's main competitor in colonial expansion was Spain. Although Spain was in decline, it still held numerous overseas colonies and vast amounts of gold and silver extracted from them. On land, England's primary rival was France. Under Louis XIV, France reached its peak power and ambition, with aspirations to dominate all of Europe. Between 1701 and 1714, disputes over the succession to the Spanish throne led to open confrontation among three major powers. At the time, the Spanish king was gravely ill, and on the verge of death, with no clear heir to the throne. Spain, however, possessed countless colonies and a treasure trove of gold and silver, making it a tempting prize for all. King William of England was no exception. After much deliberation, he realized the best course of action was to ally with France and other nations to divide Spain's assets, ensuring that everyone walked away with a share. However, this plan was leaked to the Spanish king, who was infuriated but powerless, as Spain was no longer strong enough to compete with England and France. Thus, in 1700, the Spanish king made a decisive move. He passed the throne to Louis XIV's grandson, on the condition that France guaranteed Spain's independence and ensured the two nations would never merge. France, having gained significant benefits without much effort, naturally lost interest in cooperating with England. Instead, they began interfering in England's domestic affairs, questioning the legitimacy of William's claim to the English throne. This caused relations between the two countries to completely break down. In 1701, war broke out between England and France, lasting for 12 years. By 1713, Queen Anne, who had succeeded William, dismissed General Churchill, the commander of the war, and publicly announced her decision to negotiate directly with France. France, recognizing that prolonged war would eventually drain its resources, also agreed to an immediate ceasefire. In 1713, the two sides signed the Treaty of Utrecht, marking reconciliation between England and France. Ultimately, Spain fell into French hands, but England reaped significant rewards. The treaty granted England several Mediterranean and North American colonies, monopoly rights to the slave trade in Spanish-American colonies, and most importantly, control over the Strait of Gibraltar. Through this war, England acquired numerous colonies, established a trade network connecting the Americas and the Mediterranean, and rapidly expanded its markets. This laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution in England. During the war between England and France, Queen Anne of England also accomplished a significant task domestically. Since 1603, when James VI of Scotland became James I of England, Scotland and England were united under a common monarchy. However, by Anne's time, as she had no heirs, the throne would pass to other relatives and would no longer have any connection to Scotland. As a result, Scotland proposed no longer recognizing the shared monarchy with England. In reality, during the century of their union under a shared monarchy, while both nations lived under the same roof, they essentially operated separately. Neither side helped the other, and they often looked down on one another. Occasionally, they would quarrel, and Scotland would even instigate rebellions and cause disruptions. This, of course, made England displeased. However, despite the arguments, war was not something to be taken lightly. To prevent the outbreak of war, Queen Anne proposed a peaceful solution to unify the two nations. Initially, the idea of unification faced opposition from the Scottish people. However, as this was an inevitable trend, it gradually gained support from the Scottish nobility. Thus, in 1707, after a series of negotiations and agreements, Scotland and England signed a unification treaty, officially merging the two countries. This unification led to the formation of the Kingdom of Great Britain, laying the foundation for modern Britain. Through this merger, Scotland was able to break free from trade restrictions and quickly accelerate its economic development. Around the same time, in 1704, English writer Daniel Defoe founded the political newspaper The Review, marking the beginning of political journalism in England. Defoe also serialized his famous novel Robinson Crusoe in the paper, establishing himself as one of the pioneers of modern journalism. Furthermore, Defoe was also one of the founders of the English novel. Both he and his works have become monumental figures in English literature. From 1756 to 1763, a large-scale military conflict erupted between two major military alliances led by Britain and France over the issue of colonial interests. This conflict, known in history as the 7 Years' War, involved Europe and the Americas. At the time, Britain allied with Prussia, while France formed an alliance with Austria and Russia. The major European powers joined forces to confront each other directly. The conflict between Britain and France over colonial matters had long been deep-rooted. As a result, the war extended beyond mainland Europe and spread to British and French overseas colonies, including North America and India. For this reason, the 7 Years' War is sometimes referred to as the First True World War. The war began in May 1756 and lasted until February 1763. Ultimately, Britain and France signed the Treaty of Paris, and 5 days later, Prussia and Austria signed the Treaty of Hubertusburg, officially bringing the 7 Years' War to an end. Britain emerged as the biggest winner of the 7 Years' War. Under the Treaty of Paris, France was forced to cede all of Canada to Britain and withdraw entirely from India. France also abandoned its territories in India, Canada, the Mississippi region, and the eastern seaboard of North America. This defeat marked the end of France's ambitions to expand into the New World. The 7 Years' War propelled Britain to prominence, establishing it as the nation with the most colonies and solidifying its status as Europe's leading power. The war laid the foundation for the creation of the British Empire, the legendary empire on which the sun never sets. The vast overseas colonies provided Britain with abundant raw materials, enabling the rapid rise of its capitalist economy. In the 18th century, the Enlightenment movement was flourishing across Europe, and Britain experienced explosive development in science, culture, and technology. In 1764, James Hargreaves, an Englishman, invented the spinning jenny, marking the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. By 1771, Richard Arkwright had established the first factory, introducing the factory system, which transformed human production and lifestyle into a new form. This led to comprehensive changes in the economy, culture, And politics. In 1776, James Watt improved the steam engine and put it into use, ushering humanity into the steam age. The steam engine was widely adopted as a power source, marking the start of the first industrial revolution. In the same year, the Encyclopaedia Britannica, edited by William Smellie, was published in Edinburgh, Scotland. Since then, it has been continually updated and revised, becoming one of the most influential and authoritative reference works in the world. Also in 1776, Adam Smith, a Briton, published The Wealth of Nations, signaling the birth of Western classical economics. This was the first book in the world to systematically explain economic liberalism, providing a theoretical foundation for capitalist economies and free trade, further advancing the progress of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. In the mid-18th century, British Captain James Cook was tasked with finding the legendary southern continent, and in April 1770, he landed in Australia, declaring British sovereignty over the land. On January 26, 1788, Britain established its first colony in Australia, marking over a century of colonial rule. The discovery of Australia not only initiated Britain's colonial expansion in the region, but also allowed the exploitation of Australia's abundant resources, further boosting Britain's colonial economy and international trade. However, while Britain was expanding its territory in the southern hemisphere with Australia, the situation in the northern hemisphere, particularly in America, was far less stable. After the 7 Years' War, Britain occupied Canada, which had previously belonged to France, with Quebec as its core. The French-speaking population in Quebec retained their French laws, customs, and Catholic faith. In 1763, Britain issued the Royal Proclamation, introducing a parliamentary-style government and promoting the Anglican Church in Canada. However, these measures were incompatible with the Catholic French population, making implementation extremely challenging and even risking rebellion. To stabilize the situation, in May 1774, the British government passed the Quebec Act, granting Quebec significant autonomy, preserving its economic systems, political institutions, and Catholic faith. Pleased with these concessions, the people of Quebec accepted British rule and even supported Britain during the American War of Independence. The Quebec Act successfully stabilized Canada and prevented the region from seeking independence. In contrast, the 13 American colonies were far less compliant. After the 7 Years' War, Britain imposed heavy taxes on the North American colonies to recoup its war expenses. Prior to this, the Navigation Acts had already restricted trade in the American colonies. In 1773, the British Parliament, aiming to help the East India Company overcome a financial crisis, granted it a monopoly to sell large quantities of tea in North America. The Quebec Act, which offered numerous privileges to Catholics, further angered the predominantly Puritan population in the American colonies. They felt unjustly treated, as the policies created stark disparities between the colonies. Britain's series of oppressive measures led the 13 American colonies to unite and launch the War of Independence, to avenge its defeat in the 7 Years' War. France allied with America. Eventually, with France's assistance, the United States emerged victorious, and in September 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, in which Britain officially recognized American independence. America's independence dealt a significant blow to Britain. Following this, Britain shifted its colonial governance policies, focusing more on economic control rather than direct political management.